Thank you everyone for joining us today. I want to welcome everyone to this Learn at Lunch webinar. We will hear from Agricultural Economics PhD student Katie Welch as she discusses her research on the impact of drought and disaster relief insurance on rural Oklahoma communities. If you have questions, you may ask them through the chat window. You can open the chat window by clicking the chat button at the bottom of the screen. We have additional farm management resources available on the eFarm Management page, and I will share this link in the chat window. Our next scheduled webinar is January 23rd at noon, and it will be about keeping better financial records. Katie, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining. Today I'm going to be talking about the impact of drought and disaster relief insurance on rural Oklahoma. I've been working on this project with Dr. Dayton Lambert, Amy Hagerman, Eric Kruger, Leisha Lambert, Tyson Auctioner, and Paul Weckler here at Oklahoma State. Let's see if I can get my slide to move. There we go. So what we're trying to find is that what the economic losses experienced by communities in drought. So the counties that we're looking at are Tillman, Jackson, and Harmon counties. And so we're primarily going to be looking at the crop and livestock sectors as far as direct impacts go. And then we also wanted to look at how crop insurance can mitigate the effects of drought-related loss. And that will just allow us to provide information for drought mitigation decision makers as they consider how to use water and how to allocate water within their communities. This is just a quick look at historical drought severity in Oklahoma. You'll see that there was a period of extreme drought in 2006 and 2007. There was also a period of drought from 2011 to a little halfway through 2015. Another between 2018, 2019, and then in the most recent years as well. And these colors do coordinate to the severity of the drought. So the light yellow is going to be the least severe, and the dark red is going to be the most severe. So we can see that really the rough spots were those years I just pointed out. And then here we're just looking at how that is mapped across the state. So the previous slide showed the overall drought impacts, and then this is showing how it occurs across the state. And what you're going to notice is there is an east-west pattern here. The western side of the state does experience more severe drought typically than the eastern side. So in 2011, nearly all of this, more than half of the state was an exceptional drought, with all of it being in severe drought or worse. And then these drought levels are categorized by some different features. So yellow, the D0 drought, is just abnormally dry. So your crops are going to be stressed, and then your stock pond levels will be declining. But as you move up through these levels, it gets more and more severe. And in D4, you have cracked ground, failed crops, people are liquidating their herds. The cost of hay and water is prohibitive because it's so scarce. And then you also get really long fire seasons and increased burn restrictions. And so we can see, like I just said about that 2011 drought, most of the state was in it. And then 2022, the most recent drought, again, the western half of the state is primarily the portion that's most severely affected. And the counties that we're going to be looking at in particular are going to be in the very southwest corner of Oklahoma. And we'll have a map in just a minute showing that. So like we talked about, there are some direct effects of drought where you have those economic losses in your crop and livestock sectors, along with things like water restrictions, brush fires, and then that'll lead to loss of recreation as well. But we know that the effects of drought don't just stop at these production sectors, that it's going to actually trickle through your economy based on the changes in output and the flow of goods. So we're going to be looking at this problem using input-output analysis. And that just means that it's based on export-based theory. And that means that a region produces some good or service that's demanded outside of the region, and that generates income through sales. And so those sales bring income into your region, and then how much that money is respent locally determines how large that multiplier is going to be and how large that effect size is going to be. And so we can think about what I was just saying about direct effects. So our crop producers and our livestock producers are going to have change in yield. They're going to have change in harvest. They're also going to have changes in their herd size and the herd composition. And that's going to affect two different sections, right? We have the people who they're buying inputs from. So they may not be buying as many inputs. They may not be like, if their crops are failing, they may not be purchasing harvesting from custom harvesting and things like that. And they may not be purchasing as much fertilizer, because why would you fertilize a dry, dead field, right? So that's going to change the amount that their input industries are earning. And it's going to change the amount that the labor those industries have, how much they're paying them, because their hours may be reduced or people may be laid off entirely. And so that's going to lead to our induced effects, which is just the change in amount of spending by our households. So if someone is laid off, they're no longer going to have that income into their household. So the household spending is going to change. Then we also see our forward linkages. So these are indirect effects as well. And so that's the change in output sold to other sectors. So we have it both ways, right? They're buying inputs from some people, and then other sectors are buying the outputs they produce. And if their production is down, they're not going to have as much output to sell. So those industries won't be able to buy as much. We're in particular going to be looking at this with multi-regional input output, and that just means that we can trace the effects into linked regions. So if you have a single region model, like in this figure on the left, you will be able to see the effects that occur within your region, but as soon as you spend any of that money outside of the region, you can't follow it anymore. With your multiple region model, you have that same within region effect, but then you can also trace it into your second region, see where it gets spent within the second region, and you can also trace how it gets spent back into your first region. So it just allows you to follow the money a little longer. And so how that looks within this project is that we have 3 regions. Jackson, Harmon, and Tillman are those dark red counties in the very southwest corner of Oklahoma. So that's going to be our direct effect region. That's where all the impacts are going to be placed. That's where we're going to measure the changes in production and revenues for our agricultural sectors. Then we have Kiowa and Greer as a second region, and the rest of Oklahoma as our third region. So the way this looks with arrows like the previous slide, is that we're going to have some effect that occurs within that dark red region. We're going to see how the effects trickle within that region and into the Kiowa and Greer region and into the rest of Oklahoma. And then we're going to lose any that go outside of the state. But then we can also follow and see how the change in spending is affected in that second region, and how it flows back into our first and goes into the third, and again leaves the state. And the same thing with our third region. So we're just able to trace those effects a little longer. We use data from a couple of different sources. So the USDA provides most of the data through NASS, which is the National Agricultural Statistics Service. We also use the Bureau of Economic Analysis and MPlan, which is our software, and they have an underlying data layer that we use as well. So we're going to talk about a couple different kinds of effects. The first is going to be output, and this is just sales and receipts and other operating income. Employment, this is the total number of jobs, so full-time, part-time, and seasonal employment. And finally, value added. It's composed of a few different things, including proprietary income, employee compensation, other property income, and then taxes on production and imports. And it's basically the industry's contribution to GDP. Some people like to think of it as profit, whereas output would be more like revenue. So if you like to think about it that way, that's one way you can. So just looking at Jackson, Harmon, and Tillman to start with, you're probably curious as to know how much these agricultural sectors contribute to the economy of these counties to start with. And so we found that there are a little over 2,800 jobs, $518 million in output, and $175 million in value added. And one thing you can see in this chart below is that, as you would expect, most of the columns are primarily orange because those are direct effects, right? Those are the livestock and the crop sectors, which is the agricultural sectors. But in our fourth column along, you'll see it's yellow and green. So that's where some of our indirect and induced effects come in. Those effects where changing in the sectors changes how much they purchase from their input and output sectors. And so the financial, insurance, and real estate is one of the major ones affected, and even comes in ahead of some of the agricultural ones in terms of output. So the way that we're doing our calculations is to calculate how much is lost due to drought. We're going to take our actual revenue minus our potential revenue. And so potential revenue is just what the producer could have earned if there hadn't been a drought. So that's the planted acres multiplied by an average harvest percentage, an average yield, and the current price. And then the actual revenue is going to be what they did earn in that period. And so the difference is what we can attribute to drought. Then to look at how insurance affects this, we're just going to add that insurance indemnity payment back into our drought loss calculation. And then livestock, we're doing a little bit differently, because if we think about livestock, crops are typically grown and sold within a year period. Sometimes a little different, but for the most part, we can attribute it into one season. Livestock we keep over multiple years. And so we're going to see some different effects from drought, because a lot of times when drought first starts, according to farmers we talk to within the study region, they don't want to sell off their herd immediately. They've worked a long time to get the genetic integrity of this herd, and they don't want to jeopardize that. So they're going to hold on to it. But as drought starts getting worse and worse, that's when they're going to have to start selling off or overgrazing, things like that. And so the way we're going to measure this is by looking at the change in the value of inventory, because as they sell cattle, their inventory is going to change. As the composition of the herd they have, their inventory value is going to change. And so these are what you're looking at the screen right now is just the drought impact estimation. So these are the numbers that we calculated as the direct effects to those regions. So the crop calculations I just talked about, that's what these are. And so you'll see a couple things. One is that in 2011, we have higher impacts than the 2012, 2013, 2014 years. So what we would expect is, after running this through the model, we're going to have higher impacts in 2011. Another thing you'll notice here is that there are a few positive numbers. So in a drought loss, you wouldn't expect to see positive numbers, but we had a few events. So in 2012, wheat, there was a bumper wheat crop. So we actually see a positive number here. And then in 2013 and 2014, we have positive numbers for our livestock. And that's because there were record high cattle prices those years. It was the smallest supply and the smallest cattle herds we had seen in decades. And so that drove the price up. So after we run it through the model, like we suspected, 2011 does have higher losses compared to our 2012, 2013, 2014 years. And so in 2011 alone, there was a loss of $332 million in output, over 2,000 jobs, and $141 million in value added. So if we go ahead and add up the 2011 to 2014 drought period, we see a total output loss of 662 million, over 4,000 jobs, and $277 million in value added. We add in 2018, that rounds out the decade at $871 million in output lost, nearly 6,000 jobs and $368 million in value added. But once we add back in that insurance indemnity payment, we can see that these numbers drop. And so our total over that period drops by about 50% in each of our categories. So it's reduced 53% in output, employment by 50%, and value added by 45%. And that just really goes to show that it's really important for producers to participate in these disaster relief insurance programs. And so what we found is that total drought impacts over the decade resulted in 871 million in output, nearly 6,000 jobs, and then the 368 million in value added. And that should be over the decade, not 2011 to 2014. But there are some mitigating effects. So in 2012, we had that bumper wheat crop. In 2013, 2014, we had record high cattle prices. And that just goes to show that diversifying production activities can really protect you against loss, and then also participating in that disaster relief program and getting those insurance indemnity payments can be really beneficial. And so for future work, we're looking at extending this analysis over time and linking it to water availability. And so I actually have a few of those slides added in here because I was just working on this yesterday. And so in this slide that you're looking at, it's basically those same calculations for every single year from 2000 to 2021. And so you'll see that there is that drop in the mid 2000s where we had a drought again in that 2011 to 2014 period, and again right before 2020, so that 2018 period. And that blue line is just the loss in output we would experience that was calculated without the insurance payments. And that orange line, which is above that, is the output with the indemnity payment. So you see that it does modify those really deep plunges where the drought loss is the worst. It does modify them to some extent. So if you remember this drought severity graph, if we just overlay that on there, and I've reversed this, so now the loss is going upwards. So the higher it is, the more loss we incur. We can see that it occurs at those same periods where we have those darkish streaks. So I just thought this was a nice visual representation of that. And then finally, this is just a very quick comparison with the soil water that's available in those regions. So again, it's very correlated, which you would expect it to be since we're measuring drought. It's just another interesting graph. So they're both in outputs in millions of dollars and soil waters in millions of cubic meters. And that's what I have today. This is my contact info. The project lead is Dr. Dayton Lambert, so I also put his there. And there's the survey link at the bottom there. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this point.
And I just set it where you can unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can ask questions through the chat window, either way. I also shared the link to the survey that Katie mentioned on her slide. It is in the chat window, so you can click on that as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate you filling out this survey to tell us how we're doing. Thank you, Katie, for presenting. We do have another webinar on January 23rd at noon, and it will be over keeping better financial records. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them now. If not, I will end our webinar in the next few minutes or few moments.
Again, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for presenting, and we will talk to everyone later.